On December 25th, Christmas 1991, Gorbachev resigns as president. And he says, actually, this office is extinct, and I'm giving all the powers I had over to Yeltsin, who's the president of the Russian SFSR.
Dumb.
And so 7:32 p.m., after Gorbachev leaves the Kremlin, the Soviet flag is lowered for the last time. And then at 11:40 p.m., they raised the fucking Russian tricolor flag.
Stupid.
Yep. So the next day, the Soviet of Nationalities, which was formerly known as the Soviet of the Republics, which was the upper chamber of the Supreme Soviet, they voted themselves out of existence. They were like, yeah, we don't exist anymore. Bye, guys. So then the next day, Yeltsin moves into Gorbachev's office. And then December 31st, 1991, the statement that Russia would take over the Soviet Union's seat on the UN Security Council was accepted by the rest of the
I wonder
nations.
why.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it took a couple days, like, they circulated amongst, and then everyone's like, yeah, okay, that seems legit.
Yeah. I don't know why.
And so we call, I mean, December 31st is the very last day you could consider the Soviet Union existing,
Sure.
because the UN was like, yeah, the Russian Federation, yeah, you guys are, that's cool.
You're real.
Yeah, you're a real thing. Let's go with that. So then a couple days later, 1992, January 2nd, Yeltsin's reform program, like, he's got this shit, like, all written up. He's like,
Right.
boom, let's go. It's reform program. He ends price controls, and turns out in a couple months, tanks the economy. Who could have thought?
Who would have thunk?
Well, here's the thing. The first half of 1992, after these price controls and, like, these reform programs had gone into, the average income of, like, the population of Russia went down 2 to 2.5 times.
Yikes.
Like, which is wild. So then, so back late in 1991, some amendments were passed that gave the president, Yeltsin, special powers to, like, institute all these reforms. And so in 1992, Yeltsin is worried that they're going to expire, and he needed some more powers so that he could do some of this stuff, since a lot of the privatization shit he wanted to do wasn't yet implemented. So he's like, hey, I need to do some more stuff. And so he appoints this guy named Yegor Gaidar, who came up with this, we call it shock therapy now. It's like, we're just going to go ahead and, like, throw that capitalism in there.
Murder everyone.
Basically. But so December 9th, so all through this year, like, he's just privatizing shit and, like, reforming quote unquote shit. So December 9th, Parliament is like, no, we're not going to confirm this guy. Fuck this guy. Because Yeltsin wants to make him the prime minister. And they're like, no, fuck this guy. And so December 10th, the next day, Yeltsin gives this angry speech in front of Parliament. He's like, you guys are blocking reforms. We need to have people vote on a referendum. And he says, quote, which course do the citizens of Russia support? The course of the president, a course of transformations, or the course of the Congress, the Supreme Soviet, and its chairman, a course towards folding up reforms and ultimately towards the deepening of the crisis. So a couple days later, there's a compromise. The parliament votes on they're going to have a referendum on a new constitution that the president, Yeltsin, had been coming up with.
Yeah.
They're going to do that in April.
At least they were free.
And they're like, okay, Yeltsin, you can have your, like, extreme powers until then, but we get to vote on the prime minister, and we get to reject your picks for some key ministers. So then we get to 1993. So we're mid-March. Parliament's like, we're going to amend the Constitution, we're going to cancel this fucking referendum, we're going to strip Yeltsin of most of his powers. But then the deputy prime minister's like, no, actually, we're going to have a referendum. It's just going to be later than Yeltsin wanted. Yep. So then we get to March 20. Yeltsin goes on TV, and he's like, listen, I have signed a decree on a, quote, special regime, which grants me emergency powers. And so he accuses Parliament of wanting to restore the Soviet-era order of things. God forbid.
Terrible.
Yeah, exactly. So then March 26th, you've got the next session of Parliament, which opens with a vote to impeach Yeltsin. And so he gives this big speech, and he's like, "Listen, I made some mistakes." And he's trying to peel off some of the swing voters. He's like, "Listen, like I can do better." He narrowly avoids getting impeached. So then you get the next month. They have this referendum on the president, and there were 4 questions. so there were 64% of the registered voters voted. And so the 4 questions were, there was confidence in the president, like, do you trust him? Like, should we keep him? 59% for, so like not, like, technically a majority, not like outrageous. Yeah. Do you support the policies of the president and the government right now? Which includes like all this reforms, all this shit. 54% for, so like not great. Do you want to have early elections for a new president? There were 48% for, 51%, so that's close. Or do you want to have early elections for the people's deputies, which is like the parliament, the Congress, and that was like 69% for.
That's really interesting because like if you look at like 60-something% support,
out of 60-something percentage of the voters.
Right, but why then would nearly half of them also be ready to call for a new election?
Yeah, I don't.
That's
I mean,
a weird one.
It is weird. Like yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Well, I mean, there's more stuff with like elections and referendums and shit. So then, May 1st, there were protests organized by the Communist Party. Like they'd been protesting, and then like they got violent when the police like cracked down, as tends to happen with police and May Day protests. No, I mean you had like labor unions, communists, and then they had a coalition with some nationalist forces, and like. There were chants of death to Yeltsin, apparently, which like
I can get behind that.
At this point, this motherfucker had like done so much fucking shit. So
shitty person.
Exactly. So then, so July, a couple months later, so Yeltsin's on vacation. Parliament and the Constitutional Court, they meet and they pass like a bunch of things. They're like, okay, he's gone. Fuck this guy. We're gonna pass all this stuff. So then the next month, August, when Yeltsin comes back, he's passing all these decrees, and then somebody, I don't remember who exactly said this, but they said, quote, the president issues decrees as if there was no Supreme Soviet, and the Supreme Soviet suspends decrees as if there was no president. And so like there's like clearly like a dual power situation here. Like so we get to September 1st, Yeltsin suspends his vice president, who's his automatic successor. And this is Supreme Soviet's like, no, fuck you. Like he's still the vice president. So like they're clearly like there's weird stuff going on. And then so like later in September, Yeltsin appoints this same guy who he had appointed who wanted to appoint to be the deputy prime minister before that this Supreme Soviet had rejected. They reject him again. So then September 21st, Yeltsin says the Supreme Soviet, they're dissolved. They're not real anymore.
Fake.
Yeah, exactly.
Fake news.
Supreme Soviet, whack. Which is not constitutional, but like he goes on TV and he says, listen, the Supreme Soviet is the main thing preventing Russia from having a transition to a successful market economy. Which like
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Would be very demonstrably false.
Well, yeah. And then so the Constitutional Court, which is like part of the Supreme Soviet, they impeach Yeltsin. They appoint a new president. They appoint a new minister of defense, new minister of security, new minister of the interior. But there are already these people. So like this is another like dual power situation. Like there are two presidents, two ministers. Yeah. So then we get to like September 24th. Yeltsin's like, all right, listen, next year in June, we're going to have a presidential election. And then the Congress of People's Deputies, which is like the closest, I think it's the closest analog to like the House of Representatives, and there's like a bunch of them. Like,
sure.
They're like, no, we're going to have presidential and parliamentary elections in March. So he says June, we're going to do March. And so as a response to this, Yeltsin, he cuts off electricity, phone, and hot water to the parliament.
What
building.
the hell?
Come on.
Yeah, exactly. It's so
petty.
Yeah. And then so at this point you've got
It only gets better with Yeltsin though.
Oh my god, yeah, just wait. So at this point you've got mass protests of Yeltsin and like all these neoliberal reforms. People are like, wow, this shit sucks.
Yeah.
And so September 28th, you've got these bloody clashes between protesters and cops. People are dying. The Interior Ministry seals off the Parliament building where all the parliamentarians are. They sealed it off with like barricades and barbed wire so that like they couldn't leave if they wanted to. But then a couple days later, on October 1st, you've got like 600 armed soldiers who are sneaking into the parliament building to support the parliamentarians. So they've got like 600 armed soldiers defending them in this building, the Russian White House. So then October 2nd, you've got there's the storming of state television offices by the pro-parliament forces. There's like gun battles between the cops and the military and like the pro-parliament forces. All kinds of people die. Like a bunch of Western journalists die. So like that means it's like a huge problem.
Oh yeah, that's all that matters.
So then a couple days later, you've got the Russian army circling the Russian White House, which is where the parliament is. And Yeltsin's like, bomb them. And so like these tanks start shelling the parliament house.
At Yeltsin's orders.
Yes, exactly. He's like, shell them. And so they start shelling the top floors of the parliament house. You can look at pictures. It's wild.
Y'all, communism is authoritarian and capitalism is freedom.
It's wild. And so like, yeah, and so they shelled the top floors with tanks and they sent in like special forces in the ground floors to like clear the area. It's fucking nuts. And then like, so Parliament at this point is like explicitly supported by the Communist Party. They're like, yeah, Parliament's good, fuck the president. And so you've got all these protesters, like pro-Parliament protesters clashing with like cops and then pro-Yeltsin protesters. So after all this, like there's 187 people dead and like hundreds wounded. And so Yeltsin goes on TV and gives this fucking speech. He's like, everything that's been going down is a pre-planned armed rebellion. It's been organized by communist revanchists, fascist leaders, a part of former deputies, the representatives of the Soviets. Those who are waving red flags have again stained Russia with blood. Yeah, and this was technically the like deadliest street fighting in Moscow since 1917, since the Bolshevik Revolution.
Spicy.
So then in October, fucking Yeltsin bans leftist organizations and newspapers that have supported Parliament.
Democracy.
Yeah, exactly.
Freedom of speech.
And then, so then December, they have a referendum on the new constitution that he's come up with. I mean, I don't know if he wrote it, but like people sympathetic to him wrote it. It was 58% for, which is like not like overwhelming.
Not great,
technically. Yeah, so then you get to 1996, which is the OG election meddling involving Russia. So Yeltsin's running against this guy named Gennady Zyuganov, who's the leader of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. And so Yeltsin at this point, he's in like single-digit support, dead last in the polls. And so, and he's talking to his friend Clinton, Bill Clinton, who he met in 1993.
Buddy.
Yeah, exactly, his bro. Clinton has this quote, like, I don't know who he was talking to, but he's like, I know the Russian people have to pick a president. I don't know how he sounds. I'm just trying to... I know the Russian people have to pick a president, and I know that means we've got to stop short of giving a nominating speech for the guy, but we've got to go all the way in helping in every other respect. So Bill Clinton specifically helps Russia get this $10 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund. And Yeltsin was like, listen, don't privately meet with this communist guy. And so Clinton didn't. But so he gets this $10 billion loan for Russia, which Yeltsin used to like finance his campaign. He paid off a bunch of businessmen and politicians. Like, basically this loan specifically, and a couple other loans that other Western powers got for Yeltsin, it allowed the further looting of the Russian economy, and it further entrenched these like oligarchs. And so you had like American advisors who were setting up shop in Moscow, like literally the next hotel room over from Yeltsin's campaign headquarters, and they sent info back and forth to the White House. Like we talk about fucking Russian influence on the 2016 American election. Like these motherfuckers
Right.
straight up did it. And like Clinton has so many quotes where he's like, I just really want this guy to win. and did everything he could straight up, like straight accepting like sending fucking American troops to Russia. So yeah, so basically that was those were some of the wild things that Yeltsin did. Here, let me just talk about the impact, which is going to be depressing as fuck.
Hey.
So from 1991 to 1995, 116,000 state-owned enterprises were privatized in Russia. and like raw materials and like entire sections of the country's industrial infrastructure were sold off to the highest bidder. And so they had a couple of ways of doing this. So there was one called voucher privatization, which was like they gave vouchers, which each corresponded to a share of the national wealth. They distributed them equally among the population, like 98% of the population they gave these vouchers to, which like interesting idea in theory. And so these vouchers could be exchanged for shares in enterprises that were going to be privatized. Well, here's the thing: most people didn't know what the fuck these were.
Yeah.
Or they were like crazy poor, so they sold these things to like scalpers and like these budding oligarchs, and so most of these vouchers and most of the shares ended up in the fucking management of the enterprises that were already there.
Hooray!
Yeah, exactly. Or these like investment banks that were like really taking off, and they had this other program which is great called loans for shares, where basically they had shares of the biggest state industrial assets were given to these commercial banks or like wealthy like dudes in exchange for these like really tiny loans, and then so the government never pays back the loans, so the banks get to keep the shares and take over the companies. So like so one example is you've got this company called Yukos, which was an oil and gas company that was previously owned by the state. It was sold to this one dude, I don't remember his name, for like 6.2% of what it was valued at.
Jesus.
And that's not uncommon. Like there were all of these like state enterprises sold off to these dudes for like percentages, and then these guys, I mean, that's why we talk about Russian oligarchs. This is how this happened. Like these guys were making a killing off of
and not a small number of them were individuals who were enriched via black market enterprises. Like these were criminals, gangsters who came to power via the black market economy and went around buying state enterprises.
Absolutely, because like, yeah, exactly. And so by 1995 you got employment at 10%, which like technically there was no unemployment during the Soviet Union, because if you wanted a job you could fucking have a job.
Right.
They would find you a job. But like poverty rate in 2004, according to the World Bank, which is not exactly a pro-communist organization, 20%. Like a fifth of the population was in poverty. So then by 1997, the real average income of working class families was like 30% of what it was in 1990. And so like in 1997, there was a UN agency, they said 100 million people were below the poverty line in Russia, specifically. This process was replicated in like Belarus and Poland specifically, where poverty rates, like in Belarus, poverty rates after the Soviet Union collapse went up 73%, which is insane. And so then you've got like Harvard Institution for International Development, which is like a group from Harvard University. They were helping, so USAID, which is like the whatever it is, they were giving $300 million in economic development, quote unquote. And so it went through this HIID, this Harvard group. It was reform programs for like privatization, development of capital markets, creation of a Russian Securities and Exchanges Commission. The Harvard University, like, specifically at fault for a lot of like the shit that happens in Russia. So like, here's the thing: between 1990 and 1994, Russia's death rate increased by 40%. Male life expectancy went from 63 years to 57 years. And for women, it went from 74 years to 71 years, which is unprecedented during peacetime, during modern history. Yeah, and then you've got, after cardiovascular disease, you've got, like, the leading causes of death are, like, accidents, suicides, and homicides. Alcohol-related deaths tripled in the first 4 years of the counter-revolution. Under the Soviet Union, like, you got free healthcare, basically. You were promised like free healthcare and like free healthcare assistance, but once the Soviet Union collapsed, you had this complicated mixture of like private insurers and public financing. The OECD, which is like the Organization of Economic country develop. It's like again, not a communist organization.
Right.
They said, listen, Russia's population, like health, it's declined by basically every measure we can come up with. Like women's wages fell from 70% of that of men in 1990, which again is not great, went to 40% of men's in 1997, which is insane. Women, after 1990, suffered violent crime in just shocking numbers, with the number of women murdered increasing 7-fold from 1990 to 1997, which is disgusting. Like in 2014, I don't know what it is right now. In 2014, 100 Russians owned a third of the country's wealth, and like Russia's an enormous country. And yeah, like Justin mentioned earlier, like Cuba's GDP plummeted by 50% after like not getting any Soviet aid. There was a pullout of Afghanistan. Russia like helped out in the Gulf War. Like there was a quote of Gorbachev saying to Bush's fucking chief of staff, like, "Oh, I want to emphasize that we would like to be by your side in any situation."
Oh no.
Yeah, exactly. And
But
so
you did.
and so like even the most ardent capitalists will say that like, yeah, what's happened in Russia's not great since the Soviet Union collapsed.
They'll somehow blame communism.
Exactly. And that's where we are today.